Chung! Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. James, where are you? Not in your normal short magazine, Lee Enfield lined crib. Where are you?
Yeah, no, I'm in the Goalhanger offices, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I've come up to town. I suddenly realised I'd made a massive logistical cock-up because I'd completely forgotten that I've got to do a talk in London tonight about Big Week.
Big Week?
Yep.
Right.
Yep. And we've got various things booked in today, special guests and whatnot that we've got to talk to. And I suddenly realised that I would have to cancel that unless I got up to London very early.
Yeah.
So hence why I'm here. And very nice it is to be up here too. See all the gang. So that's all nice.
It's a bit tidy. It's got a kind of screensaver vibe in a way that your normal backdrop doesn't, with sort of tanks.
No, but honestly, my man cave at the moment is just absolute carnage. It's gone completely to pot. I'm full flow in casino, and it's my whole desk is strewn. There's not much room, and But I tell you what, I must tell you, I came across this absolutely extraordinary story. So I've been doing air power and whatnot, and the decisions to move the strategic air forces to Italy, and why that was such a big part of the whole Italian invasion in September 1943.
Yeah. And
one of the things I came across was the fact that the Bomber Command was also hitting northern Italy at the same time as they were roughing up the Italians from the south, and the Germans in the run up to the invasion. So we're talking about kind of middle of August 1943 now. And have you ever heard of Flight Sergeant Arthur Aaron?
No.
Okay, so this is an amazing story. So Bomber Command sends over a whole force to go and attack from Britain, to go and attack Turin and Milan and Genoa on the nights of the, I think it was the 8th, 9th, 10th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 15th, 16th of August.
So it's getting the works then.
Yeah, and they're getting absolutely painted. And they destroy, in Milan, for example, they destroy 1,500 houses, damage another 1,500, 1,100 people killed. It's when they destroy that church which got the Last Supper on. And the only wall of the refectory, which is still standing after the bombing, is the one with Leonardo's The Last Supper on. Fortunately, survives.
Yeah.
But might not have done.
It's a miracle.
It's a miracle. But anyway, Arthur Aaron is a flight sergeant. He's 21 years old, and he's flying his short Sterling.
Yeah.
And anyway, he's flying over Turin, and suddenly he gets shot at. And the windscreen and the Sterling is smashed, and he gets hit by a bullet in the jaw, which smashes his jaw and takes off half his face.
Right.
And he immediately slumps forward, hits the control column, and it goes into a dive. And the flight engineer, obviously no co-pilot, the flight engineer who's on the dicky seat next to him manages to pull him back, recover, and they get him out. The crew get him out of the pilot seat and take him to the back of the aircraft where they give him morphine. But he feels bad because they're all in the crew. They haven't got, they're 5 hours from Bone airfield in North Africa, where they're due to land. Where they're heading back to the nearest port, because it's one of those ones where you go on and fly on again.
Yeah.
And so he comes to, and he insists on being taken back to the pilot seat, despite having half his face blown away.
Dear God.
Gets back in the seat, and they manhandle him into the seat, place his feet on the rudder, and obviously, he's incredibly weak, but he manages to get a grip and flies them most of the way back. Then eventually just collapses with exhaustion. So they take him off the seat again, and the bomb aimer takes over.
Oh my God.
The bomb aimer takes over, and obviously he can't really speak anymore because half his face is gone. Yeah. So he writes instructions, because by the time they're getting close to Bone, it's been 5 hours since they've been around near Turin. Yeah. They're running out of fuel. And what are they going to do? So they've got to try and land the aircraft at Bone. So the landing strip is all lit up with the flare path and all the rest of it. And Flight Sergeant Aaron, writes with his left hand instructions for the bomb aimer about how to land the plane. And they do.
Christ.
And they all survive, apart from Aaron, who, had he just been left quietly to his own devices at the back of the plane,
might have survived.
Might have survived, but dies of not of having half his face blown away, but dies of exhaustion and blood loss 9 hours later.
Jeepers. Is he
and
decorated?
he gets a posthumous Victoria Cross. And
well, I should hope so.
Quite right too.
I thought you were going to say, no, that didn't happen.
Gave a DFC. Yeah. No, you got a VC. You got a VC. I've just never come across that one. I've never heard about it, and I can't fit it in my book. It just doesn't work for all sorts of reasons. But what a story! Goodness me, 21. Yeah. It's the same age as Ned.
Yeah.
But anyway,
gosh. That's quite something. Now, before we get any further in, those of you who listen regularly will know that we the last 2 years hosted a festival, a history festival, a Second World War history festival. We Have Ways Fest, as it's known, near Buckingham at a place called Blackpick Brewery, which is actually right next door to Silverstone Racetrack in North Bucks, and just off the M40. It's dead easy to get to from all over the country.
Come easy. And A43.
It's the 8th, 9th, 10th of September, isn't it? Friday through. And the tickets are now on sale, but at the moment, exclusively until the 12th of December for our Patreons, the independent company who have signed up for our Patreon. And tickets are £125 plus booking fees and VAT. It's a full day on Friday, a full day on Saturday, tanks going boom on Sunday morning to send you trickling home at the end of the festival. There will be talks, there will be music, there will be stuff to watch, there will be gripping panels. There will be our listeners speaking. We're going to have a sort of We Have Ways Festival fringe with our listeners talking about the things they want to talk about. I'm hoping for a history of helmets myself.
80 Bond. We want your helmets, and we want them in September. But basically, after the 12th, which is a week, which is on Monday next week, the tickets will be available to everybody. But the benefits of membership and such for the Patreon listeners is that they get to jump the queue by a few days. But the last two were fantastic fun. That's the main thing, is they're really good fun. I've never been to a festival before where there were no arseholes, unless, of course, it's me that's the arsehole. But I've never been to a festival where they seem so thin on the ground. And we'd love to see you there because we know how much you love War Waffle, and this is the sort of War Waffle. It's like the biggest Second World War speakeasy you could ever go to. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, isn't it? And it's great to get a lot of the friends of the show, so familiar people that we've had on, and terrific historians as well, and chewing the cud. Yep. And it's an opportunity to meet everybody because although I don't know, Max Hastings, for example, last year might turn up to do a talk. He's they're on hand to chat and to be accosted. There's also just huge amounts of hardware and a huge amount of knowledge. Yeah. And it's great to be able to share that and have a few ales and have a bit of a laugh as well, and make it a bit of a gathering. It's great fun. It's that the second full week, or it's the first full weekend of September. I think that's right. Anyway, so it's the 8th, 9th, 10th, and we look forward to seeing you there. That's enough. But that's enough late stage capitalism plugging. Yep. Jim, what have you been up to? I've had a really interesting time actually. I've been in Northern Ireland, which I'd never been to before. So a friend of mine is the GOC, the General Officer Commanding, which obviously used to be a general's job back in the day. And it was quite interesting to see some of the people that had been GOC Northern Ireland, including Alan Cunningham, who's of course first commander of 8th Army. Back in the day in 1941, sacked early 1942. In post by 43 or something like that. And the guy before him is General Franklin, who is, of course, is commander of Frank Force in the BEF in northern France in May 1940. So very interesting. Anyway, he was over there, and so he lives in our village, and so he and his wife are mates, and invited us over, and we thought, well, what a great opportunity. And it was fascinating. I was really struck by so many different factors, really. How brilliant it is in many ways, how there's still kind of a lot of poverty and a lot of division in certain parts of Belfast, but other parts which are completely thriving. And we did have a look at the old Harland and Wolff shipyards, and there was a sort of wistfulness there because obviously this was once such a hub of shipbuilding, like the premier, along with sort of Greenock, it's the premier hub of shipbuilding. And Britain had, ruled the waves on the back of its shipbuilding capacity. And you couldn't help feeling a little bit kind of wistful. We went to the Titanic Museum and stuff, which was excellent, I have to say. It was really, really good. What it was particularly strong on was the process of building these ships.
Yeah.
And the scale of it, the scale in terms of the numbers of people employed, the scale in terms of the size of these things compared to, when you're thinking that, I don't know, keel of Titanic was laid down in 1909 or something. Yeah. I mean, that's quite a long time ago in terms of technology.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely enormous. And of course, they weren't just building Titanic, they're building Olympic at the same time.
Yeah.
But then, of course, you start to sort of think about, what it's up to in what's going on in the Second World War. And Northern Ireland plays such a big part. It's absolutely incredible. So check this out. So between 1940 and 1945, Belfast shipyards produce 140 warships, 123 merchant ships, and 130 repaired or converted vessels. I mean, that is something else. And then Short and Harland, so Short as in Stirlings, as in Sunderlands, they produce, in Northern Ireland alone, they produce 1,200 Stirlings and 125 Sunderlands.
Gosh.
I mean that's a huge amount. And that's not it, because, of course, the other thing that Northern Ireland has this incredible linen industry.
Yes.
So that gets completely rejuvenated by the Second World War, because obviously there's a lot of requirement for webbing and linen. So a lot of the webbing is made in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
But the biggest, so they make 200 million yards of cloth in Northern Ireland.
Well,
and 90% of army and armed forces shirts. So they make 30 million shirts.
Wow.
I know.
But the thing is, Jim, where's the steel coming from? Because that might be the output, but that means Northern Ireland's sort of shipping effort, the docks, the stuff the stuff to supply and then export all of this.
Yes,
you expect exporting 30 million shirts from Northern Ireland. So it's completely plugged into that effort as well.
Yep.
Because this. Fine, the steel's produced, I don't know, in Sheffield or wherever, and then you've got to get it to Northern Ireland to build ships, haven't you? I guess, or are there steelworks in Northern Ireland?
I don't know. I think you must. I think you must get the steel over there, mustn't you?
Yeah. So the
bottom line is you can't just suddenly start producing lots of. Well, you can if you're Henry Kaiser in America, but if you're Britain, you can't just suddenly kind of create a huge shipyard out of nothing.
No.
Which is why Harland and Wolff, which is this huge enterprise of its huge gantries and all the rest of it, is such a big thing, because they've got the know-how and they've got the and it's really interesting because these guys aren't just building ships; they're also kitting out ships.
Yeah.
So there's also huge workshops making kind of bed bunks and cabinets and fixtures and fittings and compasses, and it's literally the whole lot. So it's just this sort of over there is the warehouse that builds rope, and wire and chains, and over here is the kind of warehouse that is doing cabinets and fixtures and fittings, and over here is the actual dry dock where they're the actual yard where they're laying down the keel and etc. etc.
But you can see why after the war, then also when that all contracts and disappears, that you might get political problems if you've got divided communities within those industries.
Absolutely,
within that industrial area. Because it's not. I mean, the other thing is all this comes in, and it's not a big place.
It's tiny, Belfast.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking Manchester here, or even Cardiff. It's a pretty small place, and the docks are, they're phenomenal. And they've increased in size. They've sort of reclaimed some land from the sea and stuff into the loch. But it's just, I don't know. Now it's now part of the Harland and Wolff shipyards is home to King's Landing. Where they built the set of King's Landing there, and they've got film studios and stuff. And interesting, the old drawing offices of Harland and Wolff are now the Titanic Hotel. Obviously.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, and the other thing about Ireland, which I hadn't really appreciated, was that a bit like Canada, they're exempt from military service.
Yes, of course.
So it's just volunteers.
Yeah.
So
Although, as Joseph Quinn said, that they do very well with recruitment because people are coming from the south to sign up at northern recruitment offices.
Well, do you know what the split is between north and south in terms of volunteers?
Go on.
It's literally 50-50. So it's 45,000 volunteers from Northern Ireland, from the 6 counties, and it's 44,000 from the rest.
Amazing.
And it becomes this incredibly important training ground.
Yeah.
So it's a huge training ground because, of course, that it's not completely free of enemy action, but it is more so than elsewhere. Yeah. And of course, Northern Ireland's quite empty. It's not a particularly popular space. The whole of Ireland has a population today which is lower than it was in 1850 before the potato famine.
Yeah.
So, there is quite a lot of space, all things considered. So something like 300,000 British troops are trained in North Africa and Northern Ireland, rather, and 120,000 Americans. Because interestingly, the 34th Red Bulls are the first to come over at the end of January 1942.
Yeah.
And they're immediately taken to Northern Ireland where they do most of their training.
Yeah. Yeah.
Headley Verity, of course, that we talked about before. The Green Howards, they're training in Northern Ireland in 1942 before they get shipped over in 1943. Yeah, so it really is absolutely fascinating. And then you've got the whole kind of coastal protection stuff. So there were lots of sort of, gun positions, coastal gun batteries and stuff all around, protecting the harbour, of course. And there was also a terrible blitz. Yeah. Terrible blitz where Belfast gets absolutely hammered in the middle of April 1941. They're slightly moving away from London, and this is just before the Liverpool Brits at the beginning of May 1941. So middle of April, I think it's something like the 15th, 16th, 14th, 15th, something like that time. And it's the biggest single loss of life in a night, I think, in the entire Blitz.
Wow.
Like 745 killed.
My God.
As a proportion of the size of a city, of course. It's massive. Yes, it's worse than Coventry. It's worse than Liverpool. And
they're flying Coastal Command out of Northern Ireland as well, aren't they?
Yep, they absolutely are.
So Western Approach is patrolling and stuff.
Yes, and they're not supposed to fly over Republic of Ireland airspace, but they are all going over Donegal. And there's a kind of sort of fudge where it's not explicitly allowed, but equally, no one
let it go.
Let it go, yeah.
Gosh, it's interesting. Well, the Republic government is under pressure from the Americans anyway to be sort of positively neutral, isn't it? That's actually the direction of political travel towards Ireland during the war. Very much comes from the US government.
Yep.
Who really lean on them actually, and which makes the picture more complicated simply than Ireland is neutral. Now, and if your friend was former GOC Northern Ireland, does that mean he was involved in like winding it down, or?
So I've got two. Cause I've got this friend of mine who I had lunch with the other day. Who turns out he was GOC of Northern Ireland back in 2005 or something like that when Mike Jackson was CDS, and he was involved in winding it down. He was a general in those days. My friend is a brigadier, but the responsibility on his shoulders is just absolutely enormous, because basically everything on the ground militarily is kind of falls under his jurisdiction, and whether you like it or not, Belfast and Northern Ireland might be thriving in many ways, but there's still a huge number of problems, and the issues haven't been resolved, and it remains conflicted and tense. And
but I first went there when I first went. I mean, and we're wildly off topic now, but of this podcast, Liz. I first went there. It must have been 92 to do the uni, I think. And I remember,
it's lovely, isn't it, Queens?
Yeah, it's lovely. But I remember helicopters, and I remember, cops in armored, in bulletproof vests and cut with guns. Mm-hmm. And then I went again, I think probably 10 years later, and there was a fired earth tile and fancy paint shop. And I thought, right, in the same place where I'd seen cops with guns, and I thought, right, things have changed here.
Yeah,
things have changed here now.
Well, centre of Belfast was absolutely heaving. It was pullulating with people.
Yeah.
It seemed incredibly vibrant. All that they're completely rebuilding all the old shipyards and docks and stuff. So it's going to be called Titanic City. Again, obviously, and that was all fine. But then you go down the Shankill Road or Falls Road or whatever. The murals are all there, and it's all pretty partisan. There's still the peace wall.
Yeah,
I mean, what the heck? What's that all about?
Yeah.
So it's it's really a place of incredible extremes. And then went to a lovely, lovely pub in the evening near Hillsborough. And it was just literally the best Elvis impersonator I've seen in many a long year. I mean, vocally, he was a pretty good match, I've got to say. And also quite interesting, he started off as 70s Elvis with the kind of, the Lionels and the kind of, the white tassels and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And then mid-set, he changed into GI Elvis.
Oh.
It was a very strong look,
That's
I've got to say.
Elvis. GI Elvis is the best.
GI Elvis, yeah. Anyway, we diverge, but it was really, really fascinating. But by my overall kind of impression I got from it was one of sort of, I just felt a bit wistful. I felt a bit, oh God, this place was, it was such an epicenter in the Second World War, and obviously before that, kind of 50, 60, 70 years before that.
Well, Glasgow, the same.
I know.
Centres of imperial industry, and
But you just feel sad that shipbuilding capability capacity has gone, and that those sort of glory years from an industrial point of view and an output point of view are kind of are no more. But I think there's plenty of hope for Northern Ireland, I have to say. I mean, looking at the number of tourists and I mean, it's sort of slightly weird that you can go in a kind of red top open air bus and go down the Falls Road as a tourist.
Yep. But that,
look at or sort of go, oh, look at that Bobby Sands mural. I mean, it's it's sort of now it's a kind of a thing to sort of gawp at.
Yeah. Well, that's that's better than the what it was before, isn't it? A mural to gawp at is better than anyway. This weekend, funnily enough, this weekend I was at the launch of the Spike Milligan archive.
Yes,
documentary that's on Sky Arts this Wednesday, 9:00. Yep. I'm saying that because I'm in it. And they gave so in the programme there's Joanna Lumley, Eddie Izzard, John Antrobus, who wrote some Goon shows with Spike, and who must have been 10 years his junior at least when he did that. Spike was in his 30s by the time he was doing the Goon show. And Safraz Manzoor and basically a bunch of sort of people interacting with the archive. And it was me doing the Second World War bit. So
brilliant.
So Eddie did Goon show scripts. Joanna Lumley talked about knowing him and about his activism. John Antrobus talked about writing the Goons and so on. And there was the section about his past in India and then the curry and chips, the sort of the racist end of Spike's output is I think the best way of putting it. Anyway, but they had me with the scrapbooks in the program, and I'd forgotten how excited I was to sit there because in his scrapbooks, what he'd done is if all the photos are familiar with that people might be familiar with from the memoirs are all in those books plus a load more, right? And also he's got maps and photographs of the places where he fought, and he's marked them up. So he marks up. He's got an aerial photograph of the hill he was on where he was mortared and then evacuated from the front line when he was going up to his OP, and he's marked it on the thing. This is where I was blown up.
Yeah,
on the map with. And it's amazing, and and it's the thing we've talked about: mountain and valley, Italian landscape. It's fascinating. There's a photograph of the ward he was the ward he was in, where he was downgraded to B- or whatever, and was no longer fit for the front line. There's his actual card, hospital card in the scrapbook saying Gunner Milligan 950254, whatever it was, has suffered. Is no longer fit for duty. The actual piece of paper in the scrapbook.
Wow. And what was it? 18th of January, wasn't it? Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And it's absolutely fascinating to have these things. And what's interesting about Milligan is the archive. The archive is quite clearly intended for use. I mean, quite by whom you don't know, but everything is logged. I mean, and one of the things the producer on the documentary said is he thinks one of the things the army did to Spike because he was a signaller. They taught him to write everything down. They taught him to log everything you'd log all the communications when he was in an OP or when he was on the, when he was listening to the OP. You write everything down. And so the director's view is that basically the army turned Spike into a clerk. It's one of the things it did to him. And so there's this massive archive, and he recorded every aspect of his life. There's a Goon Show scrapbook from like 1950, 51, where he's got every cutting imaginable about the program.
How interesting!
It's just so interesting. But the Second World War scrapbook is an extraordinary thing to look at. And they've also got some drawings. Him and his brother invented a fake country in the 30s. And invented uniforms for it and designed aircraft carriers and bomber planes and they're all there. There's all these amazing sketches that they had done for him, that him and his younger brother created a world. And it's quite interesting that the world was uniforms and shoulder patches and all that sort of stuff, because that was what was going on. You know, it just that's interesting that vibes plainly in the air for two boys in the 30s.
Yeah.
Once they come back from India, but I mean, the program is absolutely. I mean, it's very, very moving. And Jane, Spike's daughter, was there, and I had to introduce the film, and I read the bit where where Spike's been blown up, and there's a woman holding a dead baby, and it really reminded me of the San Pietro photos we were talking about.
Yes.
Because he says there's a peasant woman holding a baby. The baby's been killed by a shell fragment.
Yeah.
Apparently, her civilian clothes are up among the uniforms seem out of place. So there's this thing of what are these civilians doing in the middle of our war here? You know, could they bugger off, please? There's that kind of feeling. And then they're in a lorry, and he's been blown up. There's a guy with his arm in his sling who says, there, mate, you'll be all right. And you completely get that sense of that winter, 43 to 44, the civilians caught in the crossfire, the soldiers only just keeping themselves together.
Yeah.
Because what's it all for? And that we'd been talking about that. And then I thought, well, which passage from Spike am I going to read for this launch, for this film? That just felt like the absolutely perfectly fitting thing, because it's the thing we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And
so when can we see this documentary?
It's on Wednesday. It's on Sky Arts on Wednesday, and I think Sky Arts is on Freeview as well as on the Sky.
Jane very sweetly sent me an email about it, because I on the back of you putting me in touch with the Finchley archive.
Yeah.
I wrote to them. They forwarded on my email to Jane. Jane replied to me, because I was asking about the diaries, as you know, and the diaries apparently were sold by Bonhams.
Yeah.
By Spike's last wife, which was a sort of, on one level, it's a bit of a shame.
Yeah.
And but she did say, if there's anything I can do to help, if you want to come to the archives, then please do. And I kind of think I do need to get up there, particularly if I can go, because I'm going back out to casino area in January, and I think one of the places to go is to go to that route, do that route that he did.
Yeah.
But particularly if it's marked on the map, but obviously I need to see what the map is.
Well,
I mean, but the thing that's been worrying me is whether the books are it's just trying to kind of extract kind of reality from fiction and all the rest of it. And can you? He's he'll be a great person to follow in the book, but it needs to be
more solid than the memoirs Milligan offers. Yeah, no,
yeah. So it's a question of kind of is that possible? And I think it probably is.
Yeah.
Particularly if you get war diaries and things like that.
Well, what was interesting is apparently
not his war diaries, but I mean the artillery, the battery's war diaries.
Yeah. 56th Regiment. What's interesting is the director told me this story that so one of Milligan's pals, right? His mother saw the book come out and read the bit about her son, one of Milligan's mates, and it was all about him farting or something, some such nonsense. So she went back to the bookshop and bought all the copies so that no one would get their hands on it. She didn't want people reading it. And the bookshop thought, this is selling well, so ordered more stock.
That's brilliant. Yeah, of course it did. That's hilarious.
So and there's a lot of story. There was some sort of jostle when they first came out. There's some people going, I didn't do that. You did that, Spike. Why have you made that about me?
That's hilarious. Well, also there's a chap in his one of his mates. He's called Al Field's
Files. Yeah, exactly.
Files.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
and he had a diary. So where is that diary?
Well, who knows? I mean,
who knows?
Maybe you can cross-reference.
Well, that's my point.
Maybe it's impossible. Or and there must be a 56th Heavy Regiment.
That's not a problem. So maybe it's just maybe it is all doable, but slightly running out of time. But
yeah, of course, always running out of time, Jim. Should we take a quick break and then there's more to talk about? We'll be back in a second. Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk with me and Jim. So the other thing,
you've been catching up on some viewing, haven't you?
Well, basically, because with the old breed, you spoke
logical next step.
To Henry Sledge. I thought I'll read Eugene Sledge, and what it made me do was watch The Pacific. And here's a confession that may shock many: I hadn't watched The Pacific before, and
never.
The reason
You've never watched it.
No, and I'll tell you why. When it came out, I was going through one of my I'm not interested in the Second World War anymore phases. I was like, no, I can put
what?
I'll be interested in something else. Scott the Antarctic or something. I was like trying to not I think I'd ward myself up too much. And so I passed on The Pacific. So I've watched it in the last week. And I think it is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it is
actually I'm enjoying it more, and it may be the familiarity of Band of Brothers that's the problem. I've seen that too many times. I'm actually enjoying. I think it's a kind of a more interesting piece in a way.
I thought it was amazing. I got to see a screening of the first two episodes.
Yeah.
On the eve of it coming out, and so I was in a cinema, and of course,
wow.
and I remember them saying that one of the key people involved was sort of talking about it, and he was saying that when they use the weapons, they use real weapons with real blanks, and that's what you're hearing is
gunfire,
and obviously the Alligator Creek episode on Guadalcanal is an amazing one, and it's incredibly loud. It's extremely loud when you're in a cinema listening to it with surround sound. I can tell you, but I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was brilliantly acted. I thought everyone in it was cast incredibly well, and. It's stunning, isn't it?
I mean, the interesting thing is that there's home front in it in the way that there isn't in
that's true.
There's none in Band of Brothers, and that's all. I found that very interesting, and I found the episodes where they go to Melbourne.
Yes,
I found those episodes incredibly affecting, and particularly the relationship Lecky has with the Australian girl. Who breaks up with him, and he says, "You're breaking up with me because you think I'm going to die because I'm going to be killed, aren't you?" And she basically says, "Yes." And I found that utterly heartbreaking for her, for him, for the goddamn universe that people should find themselves in that situation. And I think it's I think it's really, really good. I think it's interesting the way they sort of hand characters over, and that Lecky comes and goes from the story. That he's the sort of first few episodes, and then Sledgehammer comes through. I think that's very well done. That the idea that people don't go all the way through because it's impossible. That you will get invalided out. That you will spend time. Recuperating and all that. I thought the way it created that sort of complete image. Yeah. Because in Band of Brothers, when people are injured, they go away. They're injured, they go away. They come back. They reappear. Whereas in this, you follow him while he's recuperating. And I thought,
I thought that was really good. I thought it was really good. I've got to say, I mean, having watched that and then gone to Alligator Creek and gone to Bloody Ridge, where's the Baslan gets his Medal of Honor and that machine gun action and all the rest of it.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah.
It's inevitably when you go there, it's sort of not quite how it is in the TV series, but it was really moving because you're at the edge of Bloody Ridge is a sort of finger that comes out. Yeah. And it's jungle, it's completely covered in jungle, and there's no sort of bare patch really. Yeah. And so what happened? You got the end of the ridge, it drops down and then it rises up again. So the Japanese are attacking down the slope to then go up the slope again.
Right.
And so what the Marines have done is at the end of that ridge, that finger, that sort of curved area, they've got lots and lots of wire and foxholes.
Yeah.
And it's still there. So the wire, you can see the wire still in the ground. It's just amazing. And the foxholes, there's all these, the lids of these hand grenade cartons, which come in little cardboard cartons, little cylinders, like a sort of baked bean tin. But the round bit of it, the kind of, the depth of it is cardboard with a tin bottom and a tin top.
Like a Pringles tube.
Just like a Pringles tube. Just like a Pringles tube. It's exactly what it's like. So instead of having a plastic top, you've got a tin top.
Yeah.
And which says hand grenade number 3 or whatever in it. Printed on it. Anyway, there in the dried leaves, it's like half a dozen of them in this first foxhole I went into.
Wow.
And you realised that the last time someone had touched that was when they were opening the tin to hurl it at the Japanese as they were coming towards them. Yeah. I mean, really, it was proper kind of spine-tingly stuff. You thought, wow, this is really, really it. Yeah. And it's such a small area. It's tiny. Yeah. It really is tiny.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's interesting in the Pacific, in the way it's presented, is what you don't have really is a Why We Fight episode. There's and so there are bits of it where it feels like it's war for its own sake. That there's a bit where they go, why don't these damn Japs give up or whatever? And it's like, well, because they won't, because that's who they are. And you sort of think, well, why don't you stop then?
But don't you think when you're in the middle of Peleliu and you've already been there for 2 weeks and it's miserable and you're making absolutely no progress and it's just this tiny 7 by 3 mile tiny speck in the ocean.
Yeah.
You're going to think, what the heck are we doing here, aren't you?
Yeah, completely. And I think it really conveys that.
In the same way, but in the same way that I was standing on that 700 meter high village in the middle of Molise in central southern Italy, just going, what the heck?
What's the point of any of this?
What's the point of any of this? But if I'm thinking that in central southern Italy, you're going to thinking that 20 times over in Peleliu, aren't you? Or frankly, Guadalcanal. I mean, Guadalcanal you sort of understand a bit more because it's quite close to Australia and stuff. But Peleliu, I mean, really? Iwo Jima?
Yeah.
What's the point?
The other thing you sort of think, that obviously, and from Sledge's account, that there's a lot of it that's an artillery battle, and basically, that
he's more man.
What it comes down to is like, if you can keep your guns further away from their guns, you're going to win sooner. But there's not room. There's just not room on these tiny little, stupid little islands.
No,
to do that.
There's hardly any room to manoeuvre at all. So and the trouble is that you've got to go forward, and if you don't go forward, you're stuck because you've got nowhere to go back to.
Yeah.
So and I think that's one of the reasons why the attritional rates are so high. Yeah. And of course, if you're attacking, you've got exactly the same problems you've got in Normandy, which you've got to attack over open ground. Okay, you can use crags, you can use jungle and all the rest of it. But in pretty quick order, that all gets blasted to hell.
Yeah.
And you've got the Japanese in these honeycomb network of mountain caves and bunkers and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that great bit, isn't there, in the Thin Red Line where they're having to climb up this hill and take out this Japanese position. Brilliantly done in the film. Yeah. And of course, you can't see it. First thing you'd see him is when you see the little muzzle flash of a machine gun or something.
Yeah.
So it's just terribly tough in place in which to attack. Well, and that's the problem.
And if the enemy's disciplined about defending, you can patrol all you want, but if they stay quiet and don't respond to you patrolling, you will. How will you ever know when contact is likely? How will you ever know when you're upon them or they're upon you? I mean, and
it's just so close quarter. I think that's the thing. Yeah. You can spend time where the only Germans you see is when they surrender or dead ones as you're passing or whatever. But with the Japanese, it's a much closer thing.
Yeah,
it's much more man to man, and they're doing these banzai charges with swords and all the rest of it. Yeah. It's very up close and personal, and not in a good way. And I think that's much more traumatic. It's one thing dropping bombs on a city from 20,000 feet where you haven't got to see it, or you just see it as a little flash. It's quite another thing having someone charging at you with a sword, wanting to slice your head off.
Yeah.
And you're having to gun them down and seeing their guts and blood splattered all over the place. Yeah. I mean, that's a totally different kettle of fish. Yeah. And it's why so many of them are traumatized.
And the battlefield is so fiercely contested that they're shooting at your stretcher bearers. The dead are absolutely everywhere, and there's nothing you can do about them.
And everyone says, no quarter was given. Yeah. And you can understand that, can't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is that thing though, that when there's no room for maneuver, your only option is to attack the other side head on. You can't flank. There's no flanking to be had. No. Everything is. I mean, it's essentially everything's at the point of the bayonet in the end, isn't it? It's
exactly that.
It's yeah. But I mean, I'm loving Eugene Sledge's book. And we talked about it last time around. I found it sort of how sort of naked it is in its descriptions of what's going on. Really, really, really very, very powerful. And then I think the TV program in the Pacific, they do an excellent job of conveying that.
Henry was interesting about that because Henry felt that the guy who played him, got the spirit of him. Felt really? It was about right.
Really?
Yeah.
Because what's really interesting is they're all scrawny blokes in the Pacific. There's no one who's because I caught the last 5 minutes of SAS Rogue Heroes last night as I waited for the news, and they're all there are some skinny lads in that, but there's quite a few sort of beefcakes.
Jack O'Connell's a beefcake, isn't he?
Yeah, but you know what I mean. We're hench people, to use the current parlance. And I thought it was quite interesting that in the Pacific there's basically no one like that. They're all little wiry blokes, which I think is quite an achievement, really. Because although it's 20 years old, isn't it now, the Pacific? I guess.
Yeah, got to be getting.
But it's realistic in that sense, felt realistic for that. Really,
I thought it was absolutely excellent. I'm definitely going to give it another airing. I must say, it's been a couple of years. We've been doing all this specific chit chat. It does make you want to go back to it.
I think I might. It's quite nice to have a breather from Northwest Europe, to be honest.
Yeah, get a bit of Pacific. Have you ever read The Narrow Road to the Deep North?
No.
Oh man, that's such a novel. Won the Booker Prize. It's absolutely just completely and utterly brilliant. In fact, I know we don't really do fiction on Weird Ways, but if we ever did do fiction, Richard Flanagan would be someone to get in.
Yeah,
it'd be fascinating. I'd love to know how he researched it and how he did it, because it's so brilliantly done. And I've got to say, from a historical point of view, I thought it was faultless. I have to say.
Funnily enough, yesterday
it's a totally compelling, totally tragic, utterly just devastating novel.
Yeah. Well, yesterday I was walking back from Camden, from Chalk Farm through Camden, and the Burma Railway Memorial is there in Camden. Yeah.
How interesting. I wonder why it's there. There must be a reason.
I imagine there is a reason, but I was, it was a sort of, oh, what's this? Oh, right, it's the Burma Railway, and there were wreaths on it, and I don't think it's Burma Railway Memorial for people from the London Borough of Camden. I don't think, which is always possible. Yes, it's next to Mornington Crescent Tube.
Sure. What do you know?
Yeah.
Well, you're in for a treat with this book. It's really deeply affecting, thought-provoking, all those sort of things, and just the jungle scenes are just amazing.
Well, I'll give that a read. By the way, yesterday I went to the reason I was in Camden is I had 2 hours to kill on Sunday morning, so I went to a model show, and it was very sweet. There's a bloke, he goes, he's got this very nice diorama with 3 Cromwells and a Firefly, and with the men all on parade, which you don't often see. They're like being inspected. And I said, they're taking delivery of their Firefly. They goes, yes, but of course the thing with the Firefly, I've read that man, what's his name, James I've read his book about the the people in Sherman's on D-Day. I said, yeah, I said, yeah, James Holland's Brothers in Arms about the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry. Yeah, that's it. And the 75 was a perfectly good gun for dealing with the tiger.
It's getting through. Come on!
All he had to do was pound the rounds out and keep their hatches down. You could deal with the tiger.
All he had to do. All he had to do, just keep firing.
Well, all he had to do is
piece of cake.
But all he had to do brings. The thing is, That all you had to do thing is the thing I keep thinking about. Is, when we talked to Andy Aitchison the other day, I told you that Darren Brown story.
Oh, yeah.
About Darren Brown playing chess against 12 people at once.
Yeah.
Right.
All you got to do.
And I said, all you had to do, Darren, was memorize 12 chess games and play them all at once. Yeah. And he goes, all I had to do. And I think very often with a lot of these things, all the Allies had to do was like completely turn all of their global industry around to creating more arms than the Germans, and then destroy German industry. That's all they had to do.
Yeah, frankly, it wasn't really fair anyway.
That's all they had to do, though, Jim. All the British had to do was rely on their really good artillery to. That's all they had to do.
Yeah,
it's all they had to do, and I think that's all they had to do. Is like that should be the sort of maybe that's a T-shirt. That's all they had to do.
Along with Triple D.
Yeah, exactly. D-Day Dunkirk.
Dunkirk D-Day.
Dunkirk D-Day.
If you're just a Dunkirk D-Day kind of man, then, you know.
All he had to do was leave northern France and then return to it. That's all he had to do.
Yes, and what we should do is just have kind of, it should be a poster with lots of sort of ships and stacks of ships and batteries. And
exactly. That's all he had to do.
Sherman's coming off the production line. Actually, the picture we should use is that amazing picture of all the Shermans going onto the landing ships at Bizerta.
Yeah.
Do you know one in sort of June 1943?
Yeah.
That's a brilliant line. Really, really good line.
But that was it. So it's that thing where Darren was playing chess with 12 people at once. And what he'd do is remember what one guy did. He'd remember what player 6 did and then use it on player 1. And he'd go round the circle like that. So, and I knew a guy who used to, work for him. And I said and so I'm hanging out with this guy and with Darren. I go, all Darren had to do was Darren's like, all I had to do was memorize 12 games of chess and then play them. Just because you can tell what the trick is doesn't mean you could do it yourself. That's the
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing I've been looking at these two diaries of these fighter pilots in Italy in JG53, which has just been so interesting because they're in a place called Grazanisa, which is I went to back in early October when I was doing my tour around, and it's just it's just totally flat as a board there. You can see the hills in the distance, but it's this is on the Volturno, just south of the Volturno. Yeah, close to the coast. 4 or 5 miles in from the coast, something like that. Between Grazanisa and Capua. Yeah. And these fighters, they're 100% intense. Everything is intense. There's not a building anywhere. Slit trenches everywhere. There's a whole load of colour photographs of the second group of Jagdgeschwader 53 at this airfield. And it is just brittle bleached grass and clay and dust.
Amazing.
And holes in the ground.
Yeah.
And the command post for each of the Staffeln is a kind of, it's like a sort of shepherd's hut on wheels. It's that kind of thing. And their dispersal is an awning. So it's not even a tent. So it's got posts at the front and it's just, attached to the ground at the back. And there's a couple of camp beds, rugs on the ground. They're all wearing shorts. And, of course, they've got absolutely no chance whatsoever. And what's really interesting is neither of my guys managed to shoot down anything in the time that I'm looking at their diaries.
Really?
Not a thing. And every single time, there's this one guy called Robert Googleberger, and he arrives in mid-July.
Yeah.
And he arrives on let's say, for argument's sake, he arrives on the 17th of July.
Yeah.
In Sicily. Comiso or something like that.
Yeah.
Next day's in the air. So, by this stage, what are the 100 hours, 110 hours, 120 hours if you're lucky. Yeah. But everything is being so stretched. Yeah. Your whole training program is stretched out because it's, a lot of the time you're combating weather, congested airspace, lack of fuel, lack of parts. You're more likely to crash and kill yourself in landing because there aren't enough ground crew to look after them properly. You have to make do and mend. Yeah. So just the fact that you've actually got to Sicily in the first place is quite an achievement.
Yeah.
And then you've got to kind of survive your first sortie. And if you get through the kind of first week, then odds are you're okay. But what's really interesting is he describes very, very carefully about, so I saw these lightnings, sort of 1,000 feet below me. So I peeled off and dived down behind one. But by the time I got down there, he'd turned in towards me and he was open firing on me. So I had to veer off and kind of, I then dived out of the way, then climbed up again, sort of stooged around. I could see a little fight going out at sea, and there's another dogfight going on. Eventually, I saw some lightnings coming back towards the coast, so I thought, okay, well, I'll dive on them. But again, they turned on me before I could get in a good firing position, so I then had to dive again. You know, I was doing 750 kilometers an hour. Never thought I was going to pull out, but eventually I did, just about. And then I'd run out of fuel, so I went home. You know, it's like,
that's amazing.
He's achieving precisely nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. But from putting his neck on the line every single time he gets in an aircraft.
Yeah. Because they're not in control of the airspace at all. So
not at all. And so it's just everything about it just gets everything about the situation favours the attacker.
Yeah.
And doesn't favour the defender. And I think it's really interesting because unlike on Peleliu or crossing a field in Normandy, where absolutely defence absolutely is the easier task.
Yeah.
That is not the case in this instant.
No.
At all. So you've got this sort of, your training isn't as good as your enemies. Your facilities aren't as good as your enemies.
Yeah.
You haven't got the number that your enemy has.
Yeah.
So all you're doing when you're taking off is firefighting. You're actually achieving very, very little.
You're in a permanent state of reaction, and
state of reaction,
and no initiative at all. Whereas in fact, on land you can defend, and the other side has to take the initiative, doesn't it? They have to take the initiative, and so you don't. You let them come. Whereas this isn't a situation where they're letting the Allied air forces come at them.
Yeah,
you can't do that. You can't afford to do that. Aerial combat, in a way, I suppose, formalised over the bomber campaigns over Northwest Europe. It becomes a sort of formalised thing, doesn't it? Where there are raids and you know where they're likely to go. So you have a net, you have a thing built, but the Germans aren't anywhere close to that in Italy. It's completely beyond their capability.
Completely. So they're suddenly scrambled.
Yeah.
Run to their machines. Off they go. Climb as quickly as they possibly can. There's a radio. There is a ground control on the radio saying, enemy bombers coming towards, in direction of Capua, but it could be going anywhere. I mean, and then Groznyj gets really, really badly bombed, and they've just been out once that day. They get scrambled again.
Yep.
By the time they get to their planes, it's too late. The bombers are kind of, the first bursts are kind of exploding at the edge of the airfield.
Yep.
So then jump out of their planes again, jump into the slit trenches. And there's this guy called Gerhard Varg, who's in the 6th Staffel, so also second group. And this huge explosion nearby, the whole ground just sort of pulses, covered in grit. Yeah. They can't get out of this. There's one way of getting out of their slit trench. They managed to get out, just avoid being buried alive. And they see that there's a huge crater literally 10 feet from where they've been, which has gone in. I mean, it's just horrific.
Yeah.
And pointless.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's all been very interesting.
Well, all they had to do was get organised. That's all they had to do.
That's all they had to do. Sort it out. That's probably enough waffle for one day.
I think we've been around the houses there fairly thoroughly. Don't forget, We Have Ways Fest tickets are available for independent company members now on the Patreon. They're available until the 12th, and then the Great Washed are allowed to come. Although by the Sunday with the glamping, they might be unwashed. So it's a full day on the Friday the 8th, full day Saturday, and then tanks on the Going Boom on the Sunday morning. And of course, beer and food and entertainment and chats.
A lot of fun.
We will see you all again very, very soon. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.